Okay. Joining us right now is Dr. Ryan Payne. He's an AI expert. He's the director of the Canberra Lab and a United Nations Union delegate at AI, and he's based at the University of Canberra and joins us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you for getting through. They asked me what titles, and I think they kept adding on more and more titles and more titles. So you are a champion for getting through those.
Hey, if you've earned them, I'm all here. I'm happy to say them. I want to talk about this announcement today because there was a bit of fanfare about it and it's been called a world first. Does it stack up to that?
You know what? Yeah, you hit it on the head, Georgie. 5.2 Australians use artificial intelligence every day, and roughly about 13.6 million are using AI tools on a monthly basis. So if you aren't using AI, probably somebody you know or somebody in the bathroom stall next to you is using it secretly. So it is a big thing for Australians, but you hit it on the head. This was a lot of fanfare and didn't actually outline, really, there was no numbers, there was no details, there was nothing going forward. And the Prime Minister said this is the first country to bring, the economic, social, national security all into one framework. But Canada actually has a national AI framework, and so does the UK. And you're actually seeing other countries already have this in place. So in some ways, it was a big announcement, but maybe not so grand as it should be.
So we're not the first at all. Maybe the way ours is set up is that why they're saying the idea of this separate area which comes under the Prime Minister and Cabinet?
Yeah, it's the first inside of a Prime Minister's office to have that sort of czar-like structure where the Prime Minister himself oversees it.
That's about the only world first bit that we can work out at the moment.
Yeah.
I want to talk about data centres because they've been getting a lot of headlines regarding, I guess, legislation around that or controls. Was there anything in there that might allay some fears?
You know what? There was a few things that were kind of interesting. One thing he outlined was we have an advantage of geography, and then the sun that powers such innovations were some of the quotes he gave. And it kind of made me think, are we going to get some solar power regulations on ethical AI usage, or maybe have some sort of governance around how much power is going to be coming for these data centers? The other thing was outlined was that he talked about not having any energy practices passed on to customers, but there was nothing about the infrastructure upgrades required to power these data centers. So it's all well and good to say, there's no more cost, the data centers will pay for the energy they use, but the infrastructure, that's actually Australians still paying for that to set that up.
So in terms of the infrastructure and us paying for it, or taxpayers or the government paying for it to set it up, what are we talking about? And how much money are we talking?
You know what? There's no clear amount of money because we don't know how many data centers are going to be issued inside. Right now, each state is doing their own policies, and it's a wild west out there. So in some ways, this is really good to see the Prime Minister unifying and trying to have some sort of, unification around, these oligarchies of companies. But it's the infrastructure of the pipelines. So the data center, just like a house or just like any other factory, is going to take up a lot of power. The only difference is that a data center uses probably about 10 to 25 more times than the average factory. If you know the MCG, if you're a big Melbourne person, taking out that stadium and times it by about 20 is about the average usage of a data center. So it's a significant power infrastructure.
Yeah, it's massive. One of the other things that we've been talking about a bit on this program, and I know others have as well, is that musicians and artists have really been making a lot of noise and saying they're already having their intellectual property stolen by AI. Was there any hard assurances in today's announcement that might make that less likely or less possible?
I sound like a puppet. No, Georgie, there was nothing. That was, I was kind of disappointed in. We've actually seen the Attorney General, Michelle Rowland, consistently say Australians have no plans to provide AI companies with text and data for exemptive copyright, except for just last month, Anthropic made this huge appeal to the Australian government to be the second base for its training data behind the US government. And so they're trying to actually go around existing laws to negotiate and not pay for copyright material to like MOOCs, access to musicians' information, even to journalists writing. Famously, Anthropic has outlined ABC and saying, we'd love to have their information, but shouldn't it be available for everyone? And it's sort of taking advantage of the great Australian work that people do.
My guest is Dr. Ryan Payne. He's from the University of Canberra. He's an AI expert, and we're talking about the announcement today. The Prime Minister's been under a bit of pressure within his own party too in regards to, I guess, safeguarding jobs when it comes to AI. Do you think he'll be under less pressure after this?
Yeah, it was an interesting thing that he highlighted. He made a few quotes about jobs, and he actually went through to highlight the Department of Employment and Workplace Relationships. But if you actually read the report that the department went out, they actually outlined there's no major disruptions to the workforce, and there's a little bit slower growth of roughly 2.5%. So it sounded really good when the Prime Minister said, "I'm going to, employ Australians and make sure there's lots of jobs and all these things." But then the things he highlights actually don't validate what he's saying. So you could tell there's a little bit of political smoke going on inside this.
You mentioned before that there are policy frameworks in other places like Canada and I think you said the UK, did you? How do ours compare to theirs?
You know what? Everybody's still trying to figure this out. And that's kind of the interesting thing is that traditionally you'd have a country that would pioneer and then every other country would look at best practices and improve upon it. And so there was always an advantage sometimes to Australians being a late adopter. But now there's not the luxury to do so. Canada actually just June 4th actually just outlined theirs. So it's not even 2 months out of the gate. And the UK changed theirs literally at 180. So they recognized what they thought was going to be an effective way isn't effective. So it's hard to know if Australia, well, first of all, it's hard to know what Australians is because all we have is an announcement of having something and that, the ministers are going to work together and it's going to be in the Prime Minister's office, but there's no clear details. So I can't really even tell you if it's better or worse than any of the other ones because it's not even clear what it is.
It's been called a wasted opportunity by some, that some of the critics already have spoken up and said this was a real opportunity here. What could have been announced? Like, what are things that the Prime Minister could be doing now?
Yeah, I got asked this question and I thought of really good Australian, it's like civil aviation in the 1920s and even genetics in the 1990s. Australian government stepped up and said, okay, we have a national policy and here's what we're going to do and why we think it's appropriate. And there was a great chance here for the Prime Minister to stand up and say, here's what we stand for, here's what we don't stand for. And actually put some hard rules in the sand about what he'll allow tech companies to do and data centers to do and what he won't. And instead we will do things, we'll consider things, look after everyone, everyone's important, and got a lot of fluff without any concrete details.
The data centre themselves, which we touched on earlier as well, the idea that these are valuable for the people wanting to build them here, or the companies wanting to build them here, does Australia need to make sure they get enough money from them? Is that part of what we need to be doing now?
Yeah, there's a few things about data centers. One, they actually do generate jobs in terms of new ways of developing technology because those data centers go in and they actually do upgrade them for efficiency. I'm just saying NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google, they actually come up with water-free options, and the water issues that typically come with data centers are slowly actually being removed. Just last month, NVIDIA came up with an entire water-free, self-circulating system. And that kind of innovation is really good to have in Australia because we can use that in a lot of other contexts. So that's helpful for universities and those kind of ideas. It also does create jobs building these data centers. And as we know, the trickle down of having workers building things, if the data center were to leave Australia, or we recognize maybe we don't need as many as we thought we did, the construction of those buildings is a benefit. The flip side is that it doesn't really employ anybody once it's built. Maybe a security guard or a technician running around, maybe 2 or 3 of them, so he has a friend to talk to. But it's just a lot of, think of like laptops stacking on top of each other, floor to ceiling. There's no job there. They don't actually create anything. If anything, the only thing they do is create radiation and potential health regulation requirement changes. One of the things I'd really like to have seen was the placement of data centers not around any humans. Australia is a huge country. Why are we putting these data centers so close to rural and populous areas? I think that was a big miss.
And why are we? Is that because they're cheaper to build there?
Yeah, 100%. If you're the data center, the closer you are to the power grid, the less you have to pay to get power from it.
So that goes back to the idea around what are we getting out of it. You said some jobs initially when it's being built, but the potential dangers which you've mentioned as well. Do you think that when it comes to, I guess, those environmental impacts, that needs to be put into whatever contracts or agreements?
100%. You know what, Georgie, I think we got some really good political fluff talking about the importance of AI and we're going to do something about it. But because there was nothing behind it, you're seeing exactly what we talked about. There's health requirements not being looked at. There's water usage. There's even critical minerals to build these data centers. Where is that going to come from? The Prime Minister talked about IP rights. He talked about all these different things, and that they're all important, but never actually gave us anything about any of them and what he's going to do. The only trick we got here was that he highlighted that the Minister for Industry and Innovation, Tim, and the Assistant and Technology Minister Andrew Charlton were going to work on it. And I was kind of surprised that it wasn't even the minister for technology. It was the assistant minister who was actually appointed to this.
It's been so great chatting to you. I feel like we need to have many more of these chats as we get closer, and I guess maybe hopefully we get more detail. That would be nice. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. That's Dr. Ryan Payne. He's an AI expert. He's a director of the Can Be Lab and a United Nations delegate on AI, and he's based at the University of Canberra. Talking there today about the PM's announcement. As he said, they're missing a bit of detail from what he can see, and there were elements where maybe missed opportunities, you could call them. This is 666 ABC Radio Canberra Drive. Thanks for your company. If you want to comment on that or anything,